A grand mansion rises from the Louisiana soil, its white columns reaching toward the sky, like silent sentinels guarding secrets too dark to speak aloud. Built in 1847, the Delacroix estate stood as a monument to wealth and power in the antebellum South. 47 rooms sprawled across 3 floors, each more opulent than the last. But behind certain doors, behind walls sealed with brick and mortar, lay truths that would make even the hardest soul tremble. For over a century, those rooms remained closed, their contents hidden from the world. What drove a family to lock away parts of their own home? What horrors were so unspeakable that they had to be buried within the very walls that sheltered them? This is not a tale of ghosts or superstition. This is the documented history of the Delacroix family and the secrets they desperately tried to take to their graves. But secrets, like bodies, have a way of rising to the surface. In the spring of 1840, a young Frenchman stepped off a steamboat in New Orleans with nothing but a leather suitcase and ambitions that stretched as far as the Mississippi River itself. Armand Delacroix was 28 years old, educated in Paris, and fleeing from debts and scandals that had made his name poison in French society. But America offered something France never could, the chance to reinvent oneself completely. Within 6 months, Armand had established connections with the city's most influential merchants. He possessed a gift for reading people, for knowing exactly what they wanted to hear. His charm was legendary, his business acumen even more so. He identified an opportunity that others had overlooked, the intersection of cotton, sugar, and something far more profitable that operated in the shadows of legality. By 1843, Armand had accumulated enough capital to purchase land 50 miles upriver from New Orleans. The property sprawled across 1,200 acres of fertile soil, perfect for both cotton and sugarcane cultivation. But Armand's vision extended beyond agriculture. He envisioned an estate that would rival the great chateau of France, a physical manifestation of his newfound power in this strange new world. Construction began in 1845. Armand hired the finest architects from both France and Louisiana, demanding a fusion of French elegance and southern grandeur. The mansion would have 47 rooms, each designed for a specific purpose. The main facade featured 8 towering Doric columns, each carved from solid cypress and standing 25 feet high. Wide galleries wrapped around the first and second floors, offering views of meticulously planned gardens that would eventually include over 200 species of plants imported from around the world. The interior was equally impressive. Heart pine floors gleamed beneath hand-painted ceilings. Marble fireplaces anchored each major room. Crystal chandeliers shipped from Belgium cast prismatic light across walls covered in silk damask imported from Lyon. The grand staircase spiraled upward from the central hall, its mahogany banister carved with intricate scenes of pastoral life that stood in stark contrast to the reality outside those walls. But it was beneath the main house, and in certain sections of the second and third floors, that Armand built the rooms that would define the Delacroix legacy. Rooms with reinforced doors, rooms with no windows, rooms designed not for comfort or beauty, but for purposes that Armand never discussed, even with his closest associates. The plantation itself became one of the most productive in Louisiana. By 1847, over 300 people toiled in Armand's fields, their labor generating wealth that seemed to multiply overnight. But those who worked closest to the main house, those who entered through the service entrances and climbed the back stairs, they whispered about things they'd seen. Doors that were always locked, sounds that echoed through the walls late at night, Armand's temper, which could turn violent without warning, and the people who went into certain rooms and were never seen again. These whispers never reached beyond the plantation's borders, of course. In 1847, Louisiana, There were no authorities who would listen to such claims, no investigation that would be launched based on the word of those who had no legal standing to speak at all. Armand Delacroix had built his empire. The grand house stood complete, its beauty acknowledged by everyone who saw it. Newspapers praised the architectural achievement. Social elites clamored for invitations to the legendary parties Armand would soon host. On the surface, everything appeared perfect, but perfection, especially when built on such a foundation, never lasts. In 1923, 76 years after the mansion's completion, a descendant of Armand Delacroix decided to modernize the aging estate. Jacques Delacroix, Armand's great-grandson, hired a construction crew from Baton Rouge to update the electrical system and reinforce the foundation. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The crew foreman, a man named Robert Chen, who kept detailed notes of his experience, wrote in his journal about the first sealed room they encountered. It was in the basement, behind what appeared to be a newer brick wall that didn't match the original construction. The bricks were laid without mortar in some places, suggesting hasty work. When they removed enough bricks to create an opening, the smell that emerged sent two workers running outside to vomit. Inside was a room approximately 15 feet by 20 feet. The walls were stone, weeping with moisture. Chains hung from iron rings bolted into the walls at various heights. The floor sloped toward a central drain. But it was what they found in the corner that made Robert Chen immediately stop the work and demand a meeting with Jacques Delacroix. A metal trunk, rusted but still intact, sat against the far wall. Inside were documents, ledgers written in Armand's own hand, detailing transactions that had nothing to do with cotton or sugar, lists of names, ages, physical descriptions, prices paid and prices received, routes marked on maps showing paths from the Gulf Coast to various inland locations, letters written in French, discussing cargo and delivery schedules, using language that made the nature of these transactions horrifyingly clear. Armand Delacroix had been trafficking human beings on a scale that went far beyond the already brutal plantation system. Even after the international slave trade was officially banned in 1808, Armand had continued to smuggle people through the Gulf Coast, using his legitimate business as cover for an operation that stretched from Cuba to the Carolinas. The sealed room in the basement had been a holding area, a place where human cargo was kept before being distributed to buyers across the South. The chains, the drain, the windowless walls, all of it designed for maximum efficiency in the most horrific enterprise imaginable. But this was only the first room. Over the following weeks, the construction crew discovered 3 more sealed spaces. One on the second floor, behind a false wall in what had been listed as a linen closet. The room beyond was small, perhaps 8 feet square, with scratch marks covering every inch of the walls. A single chain was bolted to the floor. Dried blood, still visible after decades, stained the wooden planks in patterns that suggested someone had been held there for an extended period. Another sealed room was found on the 3rd floor, this one larger and more elaborate. It had been furnished almost like a normal bedroom, but the windows were boarded from the outside and then plastered over from within. A 4-poster bed remained, its posts showing grooves where ropes had been tied countless times. A writing desk held letters that were never sent, their contents revealing a story even more disturbing than the ledgers found in the basement. Jacques Delacroix faced an impossible decision. He could expose what had been found, bringing shame upon his family name and potentially facing legal consequences for his ancestors' crimes. Or he could rebury the truth, seal the rooms again, and pretend the discovery never happened. He chose a middle path. The most damning documents were removed and, according to his own later testimony, burned. The rooms were resealed, this time with concrete and steel. The construction crew was paid generously for their silence, each man receiving triple their usual wage, along with a legal agreement that forbade them from discussing what they'd found. Robert Chen, the foreman, kept his journal hidden for 40 years before finally donating it to the Louisiana Historical Society in 1963, 2 years before his death. But the secrets of the Delacroix house were far from finished, revealing themselves. The sealed rooms held more than just evidence of Armand's crimes. They held the echo of lives destroyed, of suffering so profound that it seemed to have soaked into the very structure of the building. And one person had witnessed it all, had recorded it with a clarity that would eventually bring the full truth to light. Marguerite Beaumont arrived in Louisiana in April of 1845, a French bride promised to a man she'd met only twice. She was 19 years old, educated, cultured, and completely unprepared for what awaited her in America. Armand Delacroix had courted her family in Paris with tales of his success in the New World, presenting himself as a respectable merchant who'd made his fortune through honest trade. Marguerite's father, a minor aristocrat facing financial difficulties, saw the marriage as an opportunity to secure his daughter's future while solving his own monetary problems. The reality Marguerite encountered bore no resemblance to Armand's carefully constructed lies. Thank you so much for staying with us through this journey. What you've heard so far is only the foundation of a story that becomes even more shocking, even more impossible to believe. The best and the most disturbing revelations are still ahead. Stay with us. The house that greeted Marguerite was still under construction, its skeleton of grandeur not yet clothed in the finery that would later define it. But it wasn't the unfinished state of her new home that troubled her. It was the sounds, cries, that echoed from beneath the floorboards, voices calling out in languages she didn't understand, and Armand's rage when she asked about them. Within a week of her arrival, Marguerite understood that she had not married a successful merchant. She had married a monster. Her first diary entry from Louisiana, dated April 23, 1845, reads, "I am afraid. Not the fear of a thing unknown, but the fear of knowledge I cannot unknow. What I have seen in just 5 days has convinced me that I am trapped in hell, and the devil himself has placed a wedding ring upon my finger." Marguerite began keeping detailed records of everything she witnessed. She was methodical, noting dates, times, and specific events with the precision of someone building a legal case. She documented the sealed rooms as they were constructed, noting their locations and the circumstances under which Armand ordered them built. She recorded conversations she overheard between Armand and his business associates, men who came to the house late at night and left before dawn. She noted the names of people who entered the house through the service entrance and were never seen leaving. Her diary grew to 7 volumes over the course of 14 years, each one more disturbing than the last. She wrote about the night in June of 1846 when she heard screaming from the basement and went to investigate. Armand caught her on the stairs and struck her so hard she lost consciousness. When she woke, she was in a second-floor bedroom with bars on the windows. She would spend increasing amounts of time confined to that room over the following years. She documented Armand's descent into paranoia, his conviction that she would expose him if given the chance. She wrote about the dinner party in 1852, where she tried to pass a note to a guest from New Orleans, begging for help. Armand saw the exchange, and after the guests left, beat her so severely that she couldn't leave her bed for 2 weeks. By 1855, Marguerite was essentially a prisoner in her own home. Armand had the 3rd-floor room specially modified for her permanent confinement. The windows were boarded and plastered over. The door was reinforced with iron bars. Food was delivered twice daily through a slot in the door. She was allowed no visitors, no correspondence with the outside world. Her only companions were the books Armand occasionally permitted her to have, and her diary, which she hid between the floorboards beneath her bed. In that room, Marguerite continued to write. She wrote about the sounds she heard through the walls, the screams that told her she wasn't the only prisoner in the house. She wrote about her deteriorating mental state, the hallucinations that began to plague her, the days when she could no longer distinguish reality from nightmare. Her final diary entry, dated November 3rd, 1859, is chilling in its resigned clarity. I hear them planning something. The voices below, the ones Armand thinks I cannot hear. They are organizing. They are preparing. Part of me hopes they succeed. Part of me knows that if they do, I will likely die in this room, forgotten and alone. But perhaps that is justice. I have witnessed evil and done nothing to stop it. I have been too afraid, too broken. If death comes tonight, I welcome it as absolution for my cowardice. 4 days later, the mansion erupted in violence that would seal its fate forever. November 7th, 1859, began like any other day at the Delacroix plantation. The autumn harvest was in full swing. 342 people worked the fields from sunrise to sunset. In the main house, Armand conducted business as usual, meeting with traders and reviewing his ledgers. But beneath the surface routine, something had been building for months. A resistance network had formed, led by a man named Samuel, who worked in the mansion as Armand's personal valet. Samuel's position gave him access to information others couldn't obtain. He knew which rooms were sealed and why. He knew about Armand's smuggling operation. He knew about Marguerite locked in the 3rd floor. And he knew that Armand was planning something that would put everyone on the plantation in even greater danger. Documents discovered decades later revealed that Armand had arranged to sell the entire plantation and move his operations to Brazil, where slavery remained legal and questions were rarely asked, but he planned to leave behind only the land and buildings. The people who had worked the plantation for years would be sold in lots to the highest bidders, families separated, lives scattered across the South. Samuel learned of this plan in late October and realized they had one chance to act before it was too late. The conspiracy involved 17 people, each chosen for their specific skills and positions within the plantation's hierarchy. They planned meticulously, knowing they would only have one opportunity, and that failure meant death. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. They would start fires simultaneously in 3 locations: the cotton warehouse, the sugar processing building, and the west wing of the mansion. While Armand and his overseers dealt with the fires, the conspirators would enter the main house, secure weapons from Armand's collection, and hold the building until they could negotiate safe passage north. They knew the odds were against them. They knew that even if they succeeded in taking the house, state militia would eventually arrive. But they also knew that doing nothing meant certain destruction of everything they'd built, every family connection, every small piece of humanity they'd managed to preserve. The fires began at 8:37 in the evening. Court records from the subsequent investigation provide precise timing based on witness testimony from neighboring plantations who saw the flames. The cotton warehouse erupted first, its dry contents creating an inferno visible for miles. 3 minutes later, the sugar building caught fire, and at 8:42, flames began consuming the west wing of the mansion. Armand emerged from his study on the 2nd floor to find smoke already filling the hallways. He ran toward the grand staircase, but was met by Samuel and 4 others, armed with knives from the kitchen and a pistol Samuel had stolen from Armand's desk 3 days earlier. What happened next is documented in conflicting accounts. Armand's version, given to authorities the following day, claimed that the enslaved people had gone mad, attacking without provocation in a senseless act of violence. But Samuel's testimony, recorded years later after he'd escaped to Canada and gained his freedom, tells a different story. According to Samuel, Armand fought back with a fury that seemed almost inhuman. He grabbed a fireplace poker from the hallway and struck down 2 men before Samuel shot him in the shoulder. Wounded but not defeated, Armand retreated toward the east wing, screaming for his overseers. The mansion descended into chaos. The West Wing fire spread faster than anyone anticipated, feeding on the rich furnishings and dry wood. Smoke filled the upper floors. In her sealed room on the 3rd floor, Marguerite heard the commotion but couldn't see what was happening. She pounded on her door, screaming for someone to let her out as smoke began seeping under the doorframe. The conspirators split up, some fighting Armand and his allies, others trying to control the fire before it consumed the entire structure. But the fire had its own momentum now. By 9:15, the entire West Wing was engulfed. The roof collapsed, sending sparks across to the main section of the house. In the confusion, people made impossible choices. Samuel and 3 others tried to reach the 3rd floor to free Marguerite, but the main staircase had caught fire. They attempted the servants' stairs, only to find them blocked by fallen debris. They could hear her screaming, but couldn't reach her. Meanwhile, Armand had made it to the basement, to the sealed room where he kept his most valuable documents and a cache of gold coins. He was trying to gather what he could carry when the floor above partially collapsed, trapping him in the basement. By 10 o'clock, neighboring plantation owners and their men had arrived, armed and ready to put down what they perceived as a rebellion. The remaining conspirators, seeing that their plan had failed and that they were now facing not just Armand, but an organized response, made a desperate decision. 6 of them fled into the swamps, hoping to disappear into the wilderness. The others surrendered, knowing that execution awaited them, but hoping that cooperation might spare their families from collective punishment. The fire burned through the night. By dawn, the West Wing was completely destroyed, and significant portions of the 2nd and 3rd floors had collapsed. 17 people died that night. Among them was Marguerite Delacroix, who perished in her sealed room, overcome by smoke before the flames reached her. Armand Delacroix survived, pulled from the basement by rescuers who found him unconscious but alive. Of the 6 who fled into the swamps, 4 were captured within a week. 2, including Samuel, disappeared and were never found. Those who were captured were executed publicly in New Orleans as a warning to others who might consider rebellion. Armand ordered the damaged sections of the mansion sealed immediately. The 3rd floor room where Marguerite died was bricked over from the outside, entombing her body within. The basement room where he'd nearly died was also sealed, along with all the evidence it contained. He told everyone that his wife had died trying to escape the fire, a tragic victim of the violence unleashed by ungrateful slaves. Within 6 months, he'd rebuilt portions of the mansion and resumed his operations as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had broken in Armand Delacroix that night, and the consequences would echo through generations. Armand Delacroix lived for 18 more years after the fire, dying in 1877 at the age of 65. In those final years, he became increasingly paranoid and reclusive. He rarely left the mansion, spending most of his time in his study, obsessively reviewing his ledgers and writing letters that he never sent. Servants reported that he talked to people who weren't there, shouting at empty rooms and arguing with invisible accusers. His death came suddenly one October morning. A maid found him collapsed in the 3rd floor hallway, directly outside the sealed room where Marguerite had died. The official cause of death was heart failure, but those who saw his face said he looked terrified, as if he'd seen something that stopped his heart cold. His son, Armand Jr., inherited the plantation and the mansion. He was 32 years old and had spent most of his life trying to escape his father's shadow. He sold off much of the land, keeping only 200 acres around the main house. He freed the remaining workers, paying them wages for their labor in accordance with the new laws that followed the Civil War. He wanted to create distance from his father's legacy, to build something clean and respectable. But the mansion itself wouldn't let him forget. Within a year of moving into the main house with his wife and 3 children, strange things began happening. Doors that were locked would be found open in the morning. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways. His youngest daughter claimed to see a woman in white walking the 3rd-floor corridor, though no such person existed in the household. Armand Jr. tried to dismiss these occurrences as natural settling of an old house or the overactive imaginations of children. But when his wife began having nightmares about sealed rooms and screaming voices, when his eldest son developed an unexplained illness that doctors couldn't diagnose, he began to wonder if his father's sins had somehow infected the very structure of the building. He consulted with a priest from New Orleans, who blessed the house and prayed over the sealed rooms. For a few months, things seemed to improve. Then, in 1883, tragedy struck. Armand Jr.'s wife, Claire, fell from the 3rd-floor window. Witnesses said she seemed to be running from something, though she was alone in the hallway at the time. She survived the fall, but was paralyzed from the waist down. She lived for 7 more years, insisting until her death that someone had pushed her, though no one else was present. The pattern continued with each generation. Armand Jr.'s eldest son, Philippe, inherited the mansion in 1903. He lasted only 5 years before selling the property to a distant cousin and moving to New York, swearing never to return to Louisiana. The cousin, Marcel Delacroix, tried to turn the mansion into a hotel, thinking that opening it to the public would somehow dispel whatever darkness clung to it. The hotel failed within 2 years. Guests complained of nightmares, of feeling watched, of sounds that kept them awake all night. One guest, a businessman from Chicago, was found dead in his room with no apparent cause. The doctor who examined him noted that his face bore the same expression of terror that old-timers in the area remembered seeing on the original Armand's face when he died. By 1923, when Jacques Delacroix ordered the renovations that uncovered the first sealed rooms, the family had been trying to rid themselves of the property for decades. But no buyer would meet their asking price, and most who toured the mansion left without making an offer, citing vague feelings of unease or discomfort. Jacques' discovery of the sealed rooms and their contents convinced him that the house had to be destroyed. He hired a demolition company out of New Orleans and scheduled the mansion to be torn down in the spring of 1924. But the night before demolition was to begin, the company's equipment was destroyed in a mysterious fire. The owner refused to reschedule, claiming that his workers were too spooked to return to the property. Jacques tried 2 more demolition companies. Both experienced similar problems. Equipment failures, workers refusing to continue, unexplained accidents that halted progress. Finally, in 1928, Jacques gave up. He sealed the most damaged sections of the house, secured the sealed rooms with new concrete walls, and abandoned the property. For 55 years, the Delacroix mansion sat empty. Locals avoided it. Vandals occasionally broke in, but never stayed long. The property became the subject of local legends, ghost stories told to scare children, rumors of curses and hauntings that kept even the curious at bay. In 1983, the last direct descendant of Armand Delacroix, a woman named Isabelle, decided to confront the family legacy once and for all. She was 67 years old, a retired professor of history living in France, and she'd spent her entire life hearing whispered stories about the Louisiana plantation her ancestors had owned. She flew to America, hired a team of historians and structural engineers, and announced her intention to turn the mansion into a museum dedicated to telling the truth about slavery and the antebellum South. Her plan was ambitious: restore the mansion, open all the sealed rooms, document everything found within, and create an educational space that would serve as a testament to the horrors of the past. Work began in January of 1984. Isabel personally supervised the initial assessment of the property. She was there when they opened the first sealed room, the basement chamber that hadn't been entered since 1923. She insisted on being present for every discovery, every document read, every artifact catalogued. By June, the stress of what they were uncovering had taken a visible toll on her health. Friends begged her to step back, to let others handle the day-to-day work. She refused, saying that her family owed this truth to history. On July 9, 1984, Isabel Delacroix was found dead in the third-floor hallway, in the exact same spot where both Armands had died before her. She was 68 years old. The coroner ruled it natural causes, a heart attack brought on by stress and exertion. But those who found her body noted that same expression of absolute terror frozen on her face. After Isabel's death, her estate passed to a distant relative in Belgium who wanted nothing to do with the American property. The mansion was placed in trust, with instructions that it be sold to the state of Louisiana for $1, with the stipulation that it be used for educational purposes. The state accepted in 1987 and began the process of converting the mansion into a historic site. It took 16 years to complete the restoration and fully document what lay behind every sealed door. The year 2003 marked the official opening of the Delacroix Mansion as a historic site and museum. On April 15th, in a ceremony attended by historians, educators, and descendants of those who had been enslaved on the plantation, the last sealed rooms were opened to the public for the first time. What they revealed completed the picture of horror that had been emerging piece by piece over decades. The third-floor room, where Marguerite Delacroix had died, was preserved almost perfectly by the seal that had entombed it. Her skeleton lay on the bed, positioned as if she'd simply gone to sleep. But it was what they found beneath the floorboards that provided the most significant historical discovery. Her 7 diaries, wrapped in oilcloth and remarkably well preserved, told the complete story of Armand's operations in Marguerite's own words. She had documented everything. Names, dates, amounts paid, routes used, contacts in various cities. Her diaries provided evidence that Armand's smuggling network had been far more extensive than anyone had imagined, involving dozens of co-conspirators across 5 states and 3 countries. She'd recorded conversations that revealed corruption reaching into the highest levels of Louisiana government, with officials paid to look the other way or actively assist in the illegal trade. Her testimony, though written 150 years earlier, led to a complete reassessment of pre-Civil War Louisiana history. But Marguerite's diaries revealed something else, something that explained the tragedies that had befallen every Delacroix who tried to live in the mansion. In her final months of confinement, as her mental state deteriorated, Marguerite had begun writing curses, page after page of French and Latin, calling down punishment on Armand and all his descendants. Whether one believes in such things or not, the correlation between her words and the fate of the Delacroix family is difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. Every tragedy she predicted, the violent deaths, the madness, the inability to escape the house's influence, had come to pass with disturbing accuracy. The basement rooms yielded equally significant discoveries. Archaeologists found remains of at least 40 individuals buried in unmarked graves beneath the foundation. DNA analysis, when possible, revealed that many came from West Africa, the Caribbean, and various parts of the United States. Each represented a life stolen, a person reduced to merchandise in Armand's brutal enterprise. The discovery led to a complete excavation of the property. By the time they finished in 2008, they had identified 317 burial sites on the grounds. Each one received a proper marker. Each one was documented and added to historical records. The documents found in the sealed rooms led to criminal investigations, though obviously no prosecutions could be brought against people dead for over a century. But the evidence did lead to the identification of several prominent Louisiana families whose fortunes were built on participation in Armand's network. Some of these families issued public apologies. Others denied connection despite documentary proof. The revelations sparked intense debate about historical responsibility, reparations, and how society should handle the criminal enterprises of previous generations. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery came from the second-floor room where Armand Jr.'s wife had fallen. When they removed the walls completely during the final restoration, they found messages carved into the wooden studs. Dozens of messages, scratched into the wood by different hands over decades. Names, dates, prayers in various languages. The messages told of people imprisoned in that room for periods ranging from days to months. Some messages were cheerful, expressing hope of eventual freedom. Others were desperate, final words from people who knew they would never leave that room alive. The museum that opened in 2003 doesn't shy away from these truths. The sealed rooms are preserved as they were found. Marguerite's diaries are on display, along with Armand's ledgers and the correspondence that documented his crimes. The burial sites are accessible to visitors, each with interpretive signs explaining what is known about the individuals buried there. The museum offers programs on slavery, human trafficking, historical memory, and the long-term consequences of systematic oppression. But even now, even with all the rooms unsealed and all the secrets exposed, strange things continue to happen in the Delacroix mansion. Security guards report footsteps in empty hallways. Motion sensors trigger without apparent cause. Visitors frequently report feeling watched or experiencing sudden drops in temperature in specific rooms. Some sensitive individuals refuse to enter certain areas, claiming the emotional weight is too overwhelming. The museum's director, Dr. Patricia Chen, the granddaughter of Robert Chen, the foreman who first discovered the sealed rooms, says that she's made peace with these phenomena, whether they're paranormal manifestations or simply the power of place and memory. She believes the mansion serves an important function, bearing witness to atrocities that must never be forgotten. The Delacroix mansion stands today as one of the most complete and unflinching examinations of slavery and human trafficking in the antebellum South. Over 50,000 people visit each year, many leaving profoundly affected by what they've learned. Students study Marguerite's diaries in university courses on women's history and primary source analysis. Archaeologists continue to work on the property, uncovering new evidence of the lives lived and lost there. And historians continue to trace the connections revealed in Armand's papers, mapping out networks of exploitation that shaped the entire region. The house with sealed rooms has finally given up its secrets. Every door has been opened. Every truth, no matter how painful, has been brought to light. But the question remains, what do we do with such knowledge? How do we honor the memory of those who suffered? How do we ensure that the lessons of the past inform the choices of the present and future? These are not easy questions, and they don't have simple answers. But they are questions worth asking, conversations worth having. Now that you've heard the complete story of the Delacroix mansion and the secrets that remained hidden for over a century, what do you think? How should we remember such places? What responsibility do we have to the victims of historical atrocities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective on this difficult history. If this story moved you, if it made you think about history in a new way, please subscribe to this channel and activate notifications so you don't miss our next investigation into the hidden stories that shaped our world. And be sure to watch the next recommended video, where we uncover another truth that remained buried for far too long. Thank you for listening, and for being willing to confront these difficult truths with us.